Welcome back, Time Crunch fans. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. You found the Endurance Training Podcast with no commercials, ads, or crazy long rabbit holes. Why? Because no one has an infinite amount of time, so why waste it? With that said, let's get right into today's topic, and that is warming up before training or racing. The question came from a younger athlete of mine that I recently started working with. But I get this question a lot from any age, time crunched, time rich, racers, non racers, and everyone in between. His question was simply this: what is the best warm up? And should I do activation exercises before warming up on the bike? My answer: it depends. Why? So, depending on the goal of the workout or the demands of the race, you may need more or less time to warm up. Remember, we don't like to waste time on this podcast, nor do we like to waste time in a warm up. So, let's unravel what goes into the best warm up routines for certain situations, and I'll give some examples along the way. First off, let's cover some general rules of thumb. I'm just going to go bullet point after bullet point here, and I'll explain myself as we get into the meat and potatoes of it. General rules of thumb: shorter the race, longer the warm up. Longer the race, shorter the warm up. Now, if there's lots of intensity in the race or the workout early on, you also want a longer warm up. If you've been sitting all day, and you work a desk job and you just don't move a lot, make sure definitely to do a warm up. And I would warm up in various ways, including the activation exercise and some stuff that we'll talk about, and incorporate that into a dynamic warm up routine, as I like to call it. Now, here are the main points. I'm going to give them to you right away at the start of the podcast, and then I'll summarize with them at the end as well. A good warm up will increase core temperature, get a good sweat going, improve muscle coordination, joint mobility, and engaged mind with body. It'll also reduce the chance of injury and get you ready for a hard training session or a race. Now, there's a good recipe to follow, but there's no magic routine or secret warm-up out there other than finding what works best for you in various situations, then make it simple, consistent, and then actually do it. Now, like I said, there's both a mind and body component to a warm up in that process, and it's important to recognize both. Now, let's look at different scenarios of when it's best to use a short warm up, when it's best to use a long warm up, or some version of a dynamic warm up in some combination of all of them. So let's take a look at the short warm up. One scenario is when you're just riding endurance for the day, a short warm up is totally fine. Call it 10 minutes easy spinning, then build into your zone 2 and ride there for X amount of time, whatever's prescribed. Keep it simple. Don't overthink it. You don't need to get more fancy than that. Another one is if you're short on time, you're still better off doing a little bit of something than nothing at all before smashing into an interval set or towing the line at a race. I remember Lindsay Galich telling us as resident coaches years and years ago at CTS that all energy systems are active and you're warmed up, you're ready to go within 7 to 10 minutes of aerobic exercise. That was in regard to doing some lactate and VO2 max testing, because the question was asked is, why do we only give them a 7 to 10 minute ramp up protocol and then go up from there? And that was her answer. Just like straight up, everything's warmed up after that. Now, I'm going to probably get some pushback on that, and there are some asterisks there, okay, because I don't always prescribe just 10 minutes of warm up. I'll get into that here in a minute. But I'm telling you that from a physiological standpoint, systems are warm, systems are ready, systems are activated. There's other things that we can do to make it feel better, go better, and again, connect mind with body. But have the confidence to know that if you get short on time, 7 to 10 minutes, away we go, all good. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that, okay, from a physical standpoint. So even when for the time crunch cyclists out there, even when your 60-minute training window gets shortened down to 45 minutes because of something happens, life happens, a meeting runs long or something like that. Still do at least 7 minutes and then build up to your main set. Just don't skip the warm up. Now, if you have more time, we can do a bit more in the warm up for sure, but let's keep it simple. Now, remember one of the general rules of thumb that I stated earlier. The longer the race, the shorter the warm up. What this means is since the race is going to be longer, okay, take a long gravel race or something like that, that's 100 miles long. You may be able to simply use the first 20 to 30 minutes of the race as your warm up, especially if there's a neutral start or you're simply going to finish and you don't care about keeping up with the main group or age groupers, or you're going for the win or something like that. You can use the first part of the race to warm up. Completely appropriate. I do that a lot. For examples like that long gravel race, or maybe you do want to make the front group, or you do have performance goals in your age category. And this can be a little tricky because now there's going to be some high intensity in the first hour or so that you want to be a part of. And you have to be ready for it. But you're still riding for like 5, 7, 8 hours or more. So I'd still keep it fairly short since you want to conserve your muscle glycogen and your hydration. Here's one example, 20-minute warm up, very simple. Starts with 10 minutes easy endurance spinning, 3 minutes of tempo, which is a perceived effort of 6 or 7 out of 10. And then you want to do 2 20-second openers, which are ramp up to hard effort, like a start at an 8, ramp up to a 9 over the course of 20 seconds, super short. Just get the lactate spiked up there and let your body know some efforts are coming. Take 2 minutes easy in between, and then easy spinning up to the start corral so you can get after it. That's a very simple warm up that I prescribe to my athletes who are doing something like this. We want to just do a little bit of something so that we don't have cold legs going into the race itself. So now let's talk about long warm ups. When do you need to use a long warm up? Well, remember our rules of thumb. Shorter the race or harder the intensity early on, you want a longer warm up. Some good examples of this is when you're doing high intensity interval sets in your training, or you've got a race like a cross country mountain bike race, a cyclocross race, a crit time trial, a Zwift race, something like that. What does a good long warm up look like? The recipe starts with easy aerobic effort, and it builds progressively up in intensity, hitting threshold in some short anaerobic capacity efforts, then finishes with easy aerobic spinning. Even the example I gave you above with that short warm up before the gravel race, it follows that same pattern. Every warm up should touch all 3 energy systems, bring out a sweat, get the heart rate up, and finish with some easy spinning to start clearing the excess lactate that you produced at those higher intensity efforts. But you want to do all of this without leaving you fatigued for the actual main set or the race or whatever you're going to do next. When you have a little bit more time, you can just scale this up a bit more without rushing and make sure that the aerobic, the glycolytic, and the neuromuscular systems are fully activated. Next, you know what? My advice is make it your own. Okay. I'll give you some examples here, but I really want to encourage everyone to find a routine that works for you, refine it, tweak it, and using the general rules of thumb that I stated in the first part of this episode, then learn how to change and adjust the warm up on the fly as things may change, because things always do. More on that later, but for now, let's look at some good longer warm-up examples. And keep in mind too, for those listening, I'll have this in our show notes, and for our YouTube watchers, we're going to try to post this as well. Okay, and you can find that in the show notes too, no matter where you are looking. First example is a long warm-up before hard training. This one's going to take about 25 to 30 minutes. It'll start with 10 to 15 minutes of easy endurance spinning. Then you'll go into a 3x1 minute fast pedal interval session, and that's going to be high cadence. And it could be anywhere 90, 100, 110, 120, whatever high is for you. You want to do it so that you're spinning at a high cadence, but a moderate power. We're talking like zone 3 or below. Cadence is the focus, not the power. You want to build up to a point where you're almost bouncing in the saddle and then dial it down 2 or 3 RPMs. That's a fast pedal. Okay. You'll do 3 by 1 minute with 1 minute in between. And then you'll spin easy for 2 to 3 minutes after that little set is finished. You'll then do your 2 by 20-second openers with 2 to 3 minutes of easy spinning between, and then build into your main set. Have at it. Okay, this is great for a 90-minute session with some hard, let's call it zone 4 and above sort of intervals. That's a good one to get the heart rate up, get the legs spinning fast without causing any fatigue. It's a good go-to warm up for all my athletes. Okay, second example for a race warm up. This one's going to be around 45 minutes. Okay, this one's great for those cross country mountain bike races, cyclocross races, time trials, things like this. Starts again with 10 to 15 minutes of easy spinning, add endurance, 3 by 1 minute fast pedal, which is the high cadence, moderate power, 1 minute in between. Then I'm going to have the athlete do 2 by 4 minutes at threshold. So that threshold, again, the perceived effort is 7 to 8 out of 10. The recovery is 3 minutes in between. We'll do 2 by 20-second openers with a couple minutes of easy spinning. And then we finish with 5 to 10 minutes of easy spinning. And I always tell the athlete, make sure to plan that warm up with enough time that you can get through all of it, then use the restroom, then you get up to the line to do your race. It's usually about 10 minutes before, and you still have that sweat going, but have plenty of time to do it so that you're not rushed and you're not stressed going into the race. So again, a good short, hard race warm up should be a little bit longer, and that one should take you 40 to 45 minutes. Now, finally, for those who think all of that is way too long, what is the minimum race warm up or hard interval set warm up that I would recommend? Do what I do. I'm the laziest coach you'll probably ever meet. 7 to 10 minutes of easy endurance spinning, 3 minutes build up to tempo or threshold, 2 minutes easy spinning, 1 by 20-second opener, and then 3 5-minute easy spinning, something like that. And that should take you 20 minutes. Okay. Again, reminder, the recipe is start easy, progress up through all the intensities, get in that anaerobic effort, spike the lactate up, spin it out, and you're good to go. So now let's take a look at what a dynamic warm-up is, and we'll look at activation exercises as well. But first, let's define things here. A dynamic warm-up is simply moving the body and your joints through a full range of motion to increase muscle activation, core temperature, improve coordination, and mobility. Classic examples of this include arm circles, leg swings, walking lunges, inchworm, high knees, butt kicks, bounding, or skipping. Okay, for some of those who are maybe 40 to 50-year-old, and I'm saying some of those exercises, you can think back to gym class or maybe some team sports back in the late 90s or early 2000s. And that's really when dynamic warm-ups became popular. It was around that time period. And it was we found out, physiologists and coaches and practitioners found out it was better preparation for a practice and competition in those team sports and track and field and things like that, compared to static stretching or just a low intensity cardio or quote, aka general warm up. Okay. Personally, I use a mix of things in my dynamic warm up routines for athletes, including some of the classic things like arm circles and leg swings, but I also include exercises and movements like a down dog stretch. Okay, that's pulling from some yoga routines. I use body weight squats, lateral lunges, donkey kicks, clamshells, glute raises, and just a straight up jump rope session. Okay. Some of those movements are also known as activation exercises. And the only difference between a dynamic warm up and an activation exercise is that the former is a bit more general. It's a gross motor movement pattern. And the latter is more specific. It's targeted work. Remember, there's no magic routine or specific secret movement, only the routine that works for you. So mix and match, try several different things and see what works for you for the given scenario. I use a dynamic warm up and activation routines for many of my athletes, especially when the interval sets are high intensity or the race is technical. And that technicality, or the technical aspect of a race, it's going to incorporate upper body work too. Okay, so driving your bike through single track, or hard corners through a criterium. Okay, my off-road athletes out there, XCO, cyclocross, enduro racers, you know what I'm talking about. I use these before strength training sessions as well. 5 to 10 minutes of a dynamic warm up will make your strength session feel a lot better and help prevent injury as well. Also, a quick 5 minute routine before you hop on the bike is great for people like myself and a lot of you listening who sit a lot for your job and don't move around much. Even 5 minutes of these movements that I mentioned gets the body less dormant and more engaged. It gets you ready to ride. This can also be a time and space for your brain to disengage from work and start to focus on your ride. I find that many masters athletes tell me they need a longer warm up before they feel good. When I look at the measurables in both power files from my athletes as well as research, okay, of what we can quantify, to question is that true? We're talking about heart rate, power, core temperature, muscle temperature, things like this. The body's ready to go in, like I said, like 10 minutes. Okay. Sure, on a cold day, that might be a little bit longer, but I tend to find that these comments from athletes, busy athletes, time crunched athletes, it's more related to the brain being focused on other things like work, family, or whatever issues you were just dealing with before you come to your training session. So I did a dynamic warm up, something that involves different movement patterns, coordination, and concentration, can help get the brain unfixed from life and engaged in the moment with movement, thus speeding up the time it takes you to, quote, feel fully warmed up. So, what's the recipe for a good dynamic warm up? I like to think about it like this: it's about 5 to 7 movements total, and that's appropriate. Okay, you can add on a little bit more, a little bit less, but using some of the movements that I mentioned earlier, and I'll also link to some articles with other good ideas. Start with the easier movements first, smaller muscle groups, things like this, and then you want to move toward the more complicated, more involved exercises. You want to do each movement for 10 to 20 seconds and then have a short time in between. For example, if you were doing forward arm swings for 10 seconds and then backward arm swings for 10 seconds, I would take 10 to 20-second, call it recovery if you want, between or before doing the next set of arm circles or the next exercise. It doesn't have to be super scripted or precise. You're just moving. You're getting your body activated. And these are low intensity movements which you don't need a ton of time to recover from. Traditionally, for a dynamic warm up, you do 2 to 3 sets of each exercise before moving on to the next exercise. For example, do 2 to 3 sets of the arm circles before moving on to the leg swings. Do 2 to 3 sets of those before you move on to the walking lunge, etc., etc. On we go. I also build some routines where the athletes simply start with one exercise and they go on to the next exercise fluidly. So number 1 through 7, then you take a minute or two and then you repeat. You can structure it however you want and however it works best for you, so long as it's progressive in intensity and you start simple and move to the more complicated toward the end. So that'll get you nice and loosened up. It'll get the muscles activated. It'll get the brain clear, and you can move on to your cycling warm up or your strength training, whatever comes next. So let's quickly talk about a dynamic warm up plus a cycling warm up. As I mentioned, I use a combination of these two warm ups for the races that are short and hard or maybe overly technical. Okay, especially if the race has high intensity early on. You want to spend that 5 to 10 minutes doing your dynamic warm up first. Then you do your sport specific warm up. So, riding your bike and using one of the warm up examples that I gave you earlier. For the time crunched athletes out there, you're probably doing the math and you're thinking, wait, what? You want me to do 10 minutes of a dynamic warm up and then 45 minutes with all those intervals that you talked about and then do my workout? No, it's not what I'm saying. Okay. That combo would be for races. Okay. Races in particular, short, hard races. Remember, it's all about the goal and the demands of the session, what you have time for, and then fit it in to your needs accordingly. The takeaways for the time crunched athletes out there is this: doing as little as 5 minutes of a dynamic warm up can help you warm up better before you hop on the bike. It could even shorten the time it takes for you to fully warm up and disengage with that work life aspect, and you get some cross training out of the deal. So, 5 minute dynamic warm up plus 5 to 10 minutes endurance, easy spinning, you're good to go. 10 to 15 minutes tops. Just know you don't need to do a dynamic warm up every day. Endurance days, and when you have a little extra time, just warm up on the bike. All good. But incorporating some sort of dynamic warm up routine a few days per week, especially before strength training, is a good option that doesn't take a lot of time and can provide a lot of benefit. Finally, the last category here: no warm up. This is not ideal, but it does happen. I'd say you want to prevent that if all possible. But I've been there, done that, and got the race t-shirt. Just if that happens to you, try not to force any attacks for the first 7 minutes and you'll be good to go. In all seriousness, if you're late to a race, your meeting runs long before your workout window, or you're sitting in a start corral of a BWR or the Leadville 100, use a simple 5 minute dynamic warm up before the race starts to get the muscles loose, awake, and ready to ride. Even something as simple as arm circles and body weight squats, they're better than just standing there in the cold the whole time. So in summary, my main message is this: warm-ups are good. Please do them. But keep them simple. Don't overthink them or think that more is always better. A progressive intensity cycling warm-up from aerobic to sprint power with adequate recovery in between will be the basic recipe for any length of warm-up out there. Just use my rules of thumb to scale up or down as needed. Finally, try some of the dynamic warm-up routines that I provided here, mix and match to discover what works best for you, and know that you can use this before strength training, races, or training sessions to help you in the warm-up process. So that's it. That's our show for today. If you have any questions for me and the team here at CTS, head on over to trainright.com/podcast, click on Ask a Training Question, fill out the form, and ask whatever you wish there. Your questions get sent directly to me, and I'll do my best to answer it on future episodes. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to come back next week for more short and sweet actionable training tips.